I walked into that house knowing exactly what I was doing. 5 years I spent getting ready for this. And when my cousin texted me the reunion invite 3 weeks ago, I knew it was time. Quick backstory because it matters. I'm 28 now. Was 23 when everything went sideways. My grandfather died when I was 22 and I was his favorite. Everyone knew it. He raised me more than my dad Archibald ever did because dad was too busy with his contracting business and my brother Julian who was the golden child. Grandfather and I spent every Saturday together from the time I was 8 until he passed. We'd go to hardware stores, work on his old truck, talk about everything. He told me things he never told anyone else in the family, including where he kept important documents that grandmother Ellen didn't know about. After he died, grandmother read his will at a family dinner. I inherited some tools and his watch. Julian got the lake property worth about $400K. My parents got a chunk of cash. Uncle Brent got partial ownership in grandfather's rental properties. Aunt Lydia got grandfather's vintage car collection. Grandmother kept the main house in control of everything else. I remember thinking it was weird because grandfather always told me I'd be taken care of, that he had plans, but I was 22 and grieving and everyone acted like this was normal. Then came the disaster. I had been working retail, saving money, had my own apartment. 6 months after grandfather died, my roommate bailed and stuck me with double rent I couldn't afford. I had to move back home temporarily. That's when everything changed. My family started treating me like I was a failure. Julian had just gotten promoted at his firm, was engaged, bought a condo. The comparisons started immediately. Every family dinner became a highlight reel of Julian's accomplishments, followed by questions about when I'd get a real job. I got evicted from my next place because my hours got cut and I couldn't make rent. Had to move back home again. That was it. That became my identity to them. The loser grandson who kept failing. Never mind that I was taking online courses to finish my degree. Never mind that I was working 2 jobs trying to get ahead. I was the family embarrassment. 2 years ago, I finally got stable. Got hired at a call center, decent pay, benefits, moved into my own place again. But the damage was done. They decided who I was. Every holiday, every gathering, the jokes never stopped. Dad would introduce me as his son who's going places, just not anywhere good. Mom Morin would tell relatives I was between opportunities. Julian would update everyone on his life and then look at me with that pitying expression. Last Christmas, I skipped. They sent a group text saying I was missed, but they understood I was probably working, followed by laughing emojis. I stopped responding to family texts after that. Stopped calling, went full no contact, and that's when I really started digging into what grandfather had told me before he died. See, 3 weeks before grandfather passed, he was in the hospital. I was there every day. One afternoon, when we were alone, he grabbed my hand and told me he'd updated his will, that he'd made sure I'd be protected, that Ellen didn't know about the changes, that the real documents were in a specific place only I knew about. He made me memorize the location, said when the time was right, I'd know what to do. Then he made me promise not to tell anyone, especially not Ellen, until after he was gone and I'd had time to think things through. After he died and that will was read, I knew something was wrong. But I was young and stupid and figured maybe grandfather changed his mind. Maybe I misunderstood. It took me 2 years of being treated like garbage before I finally went back to his old workshop, the one behind the rental property on Morrison Street that Ellen had sold off to Brent. I still had keys. Found exactly what grandfather said would be there in a metal box welded underneath his workbench where nobody would ever think to look. The real will dated 2 weeks before he died. Signed, witnessed, notarized, everything legal. And it was nothing like what Ellen had read to us. I spent the next year having it verified by lawyers, making copies, securing everything. I finished my degree online, took a promotion at work, got my life completely together, and I waited. Sooner or later, I knew they'd reach out. Family reunions are Ellen's thing. She organizes them every few years, makes a huge production. She'd want everyone there for appearances, and she'd want me there to show everyone how the family was whole, how she was such a forgiving grandmother. The invite came through my cousin 3 weeks ago. Family reunion at Ellen's house. Everyone would be there. It was perfect. So, I went, showed up right on time, wearing nice clothes I'd bought specifically for this. Walked through that door with the real will in my jacket pocket and my phone recording in my shirt pocket because I wanted every word documented. The reaction was immediate. Archibald saw me first and announced it loud enough for everyone to hear. Everyone. The prodigal loser returns. He actually started taking bets on how long until I'd asked someone for money. People laughed. Maureen came over with printed papers, memes she'd made with my face photoshopped onto failure templates. Told me they'd made them last night. That the kids loved them. More laughter. Uncle Brent cornered me by the kitchen asking if I'd gotten evicted again. Said he heard it was my third time. Julian shouted across the room about me working at a call center. Made a whole bit about Imagine calling customer service and getting me on the line. Aunt Lydia added that my ex-girlfriend married a doctor and sends them Christmas cards that they display on the mantle. Ellen watched all of this from her chair in the living room. When there was a lull in the mockery, she spoke up and told me she'd removed me from her will last year. Said she wanted me to know now so there wouldn't be any confusion later. Wanted me to understand my place in this family. Archibald finished by telling me they'd taken a family photo earlier without me. And that's the one going on the wall. Everyone went back to eating and talking like this was normal. Like I was supposed to just stand there and take it. Maybe grab a plate. Maybe make myself useful helping in the kitchen. I did grab a plate actually. Loaded it up with food. Walked over to where Ellen was sitting surrounded by her favorite people. Smiled at her. Told her I found grandfather's real will, the one she hid. The room didn't go quiet like in movies. People kept talking for a few seconds before they processed what I'd said. Ellen's face changed though. That's when I knew I had her. She started to say something, but I was already walking to the door. Told them I'd be in touch. Left with my plate of food. Been 12 days since the reunion. The call started that same night. Ellen first asking what I meant, saying there was only one will, that I must be confused. I didn't answer. Then Archibald, then Maureen, then Brent. Voicemails piling up, text messages. I haven't responded to any of them. 3 days ago, Julian showed up at my apartment. Building has security, so he couldn't get up. Spent 20 minutes in the lobby trying to get me to come down. I watched him on the security camera. He finally left. Yesterday, Lydia tried a different approach. Sent me a Facebook message saying we should talk, that family is family, that whatever happened at the reunion was just jokes, and I took it too seriously. Said, Ellen is very upset and wants to explain things to me. I'm not responding to anyone until I'm ready. And I've got a meeting scheduled with my lawyer in 4 days to discuss next steps because that real will changes everything. Everything they think they inherited, everything they've been living off for 6 years. It's all about to shift and they're starting to figure that out. My phone is up to 47 missed calls now. The number keeps climbing. Update 1. Shout out to everyone who commented on my last post telling me to get cameras and watch my back. Already had them installed 2 months ago when I knew this was coming. Nothing dramatic has happened yet, but the calls haven't stopped. I'm at 94 missed calls now across 3 days. That number is insane. So, I met with my lawyer yesterday. Her name is Patricia and she's been working with me for the past 8 months getting everything verified and ready. The meeting was at her office downtown and lasted almost 3 hours. I brought every document, every copy, every piece of evidence I'd collected. We went through the real will line by line and I'm going to lay out what it actually says because this is where things get nuclear. Grandfather's estate was worth approximately $2.1 million when he died. The fake will Ellen presented divided it up among everyone with her keeping the main house and primary control. But the real will is completely different. Grandfather left Ellen the right to live in the main house until her death. But the house itself goes to me, not ownership to her, just residence rights. The actual property deed was supposed to transfer to me immediately upon his death with the understanding that Ellen could live there as long as she wanted. The lake property Julian thinks he inherited that goes to me outright. The rental properties Brent has been managing and collecting income from for 6 years. 3 of the 4 properties are mine. Brent gets 1, the vintage car collection Lydia got. 2 of those cars were supposed to be mine. The rest could be sold and proceeds split between Lydia and Maureen. My parents were supposed to receive 100K in cash. That part was actually correct, but there were conditions attached that Ellen never mentioned. The money was meant to help them support me if I needed it during my 20s while I got established. It wasn't just a gift to them. It was tagged for my benefit. Here's the thing that makes this worse. Ellen didn't just hide the will. She actively presented a false one. Patricia explained that what Ellen did was show everyone a will that existed. Grandfather's previous will from 4 years before he died and pretended it was the most recent one. That old will had all those provisions for Julian and Brent and everyone else. The new will, the real one, changed everything in my favor and was properly executed and filed with grandfather's lawyer. But here's where it gets complicated. That lawyer retired 3 years ago and moved to Arizona. His practice was absorbed by a larger firm and somehow the real will got buried in the transition. Ellen knew about both wills because she was married to grandfather. She had access to his files. When he died, she grabbed the old will, presented it as current, and the new will just disappeared into filing cabinets at some law office during a merger. Patricia says, "We have a strong case, but it's messy because 6 years have passed. Julian has been paying property taxes on the lake house. Brent has been managing the rentals, making improvements, collecting rent. Ellen has been living in the main house as if she owns it. Lydia sold one of the vintage cars 2 years ago. Everyone has been operating under the assumption that the fake will was legitimate. So when we challenge it, we're not just correcting paperwork. We're undoing 6 years of their lives. Julian will lose a property he thought was his. Brent will lose income he's been depending on. Ellen will discover she's been living in my house this whole time and that 100K my parents got if they didn't use any of it to help me like they were supposed to. I can argue they violated the terms and it needs to be returned. Patricia is filing the petition to probate court next week. She's giving them one chance to settle before it becomes official record. She sent a letter yesterday to Ellen Archibald and the estate attorney who handled the original probate. The letter explains that we have the real will, that we have proof it was executed properly, and that we're prepared to challenge the entire estate distribution. It gives them 10 days to respond. I left Patricia's office feeling like I'd just launched a missile. Got home and there were 2 people waiting in my building lobby. Maureen and Julian. Building security had already told them they couldn't come up, but they were just sitting there on the couches waiting. I saw them through the glass doors before I went in. Turned around and went to the parking garage instead. Took the elevator straight to my floor. They must have figured it out because 20 minutes later they were knocking on my door. I didn't answer. Maureen started talking through the door, saying they just wanted to talk, that this had gotten out of hand, that whatever I thought I found was probably a misunderstanding. Julian said I was being ridiculous and this was affecting everyone, that Ellen was beside herself with worry. I opened the door, didn't invite them in, just stood in the doorway. Maureen immediately tried to hug me and I stepped back. She looked hurt and said she was my mother, that she loved me, that this whole situation was unfortunate, but we could work it out as a family. Julian was less diplomatic. He said I was destroying the family over some paperwork I probably didn't even understand. That whatever will I found was either fake or had been superseded by the one Ellen showed us. I asked him if he understood what superseded meant. If he knew that the newer will supersedes the older one, not the other way around. His face went red and he said I didn't know what I was talking about. That I'd probably forged something because I was desperate and bitter about being the family failure. Maureen told him to stop and turned back to me saying we should all sit down with Ellen and figure this out. That family doesn't sue family. That grandfather wouldn't have wanted this. That's when I told them that grandfather specifically wanted this. That he told me exactly where to find the real will and warned me that Ellen might try to hide it. That he made me promise to wait until I was old enough and stable enough to handle it properly. Maureen's face changed. She asked when grandfather told me this and I said 3 weeks before he died. When I was sitting with him every day while the rest of them visited once a week for 20 minutes. Julian said I was lying. Maureen grabbed his arm and told him to be quiet. She looked at me and asked if I was serious, if grandfather really said those things. I told her yes, and that the lawyer has everything verified, that it's all legitimate, that she and Archibald are going to get a letter in the next few days. She started crying, not dramatic crying, just tears running down her face. While she stood there, she said she didn't know that Ellen told them grandfather wanted everything distributed that way, that they trusted her. Julian put his arm around her and told me I was tearing the family apart. That even if what I was saying was true, was it worth destroying everyone's lives over? I asked him if it was worth destroying my life for 6 years. If it was worth every joke, every comment, every time they made me feel worthless. If it was worth Ellen removing me from her will just to make sure I knew my place. Morin said they were wrong for that she was sorry. But this was different. This was about money and property and people's futures. I told her grandfather's will was my future and Ellen stole it. Then I closed the door. They stayed outside for another 10 minutes talking to each other before they finally left. I could hear Julian saying they needed to call Archibald, that they needed to meet with Ellen, that this was serious. That was yesterday afternoon. This morning, I woke up to 23 new missed calls. But here's where it gets interesting. 8 of them were from Ellen, 6 from Archibald, 4 from Brent, 3 from Julian, and 2 from Lydia. They're starting to panic and they're not unified anymore. Patricia said this would happen. When people realize their interests aren't aligned, families fall apart fast. Brent left a voicemail saying he needs to talk to me about the rental properties, that he's put significant money into improvements and maintenance over the years, that we need to discuss things before lawyers get involved. The thing is, lawyers are already involved and he knows it because Ellen definitely told him about the letter. Lydia sent me a long text message saying she had no idea about any of this, that she was just told the cars were hers, that she sold one of them to help pay for her daughter's college, that she can't just give everything back. She's asking me to please consider that she didn't do anything wrong. And Ellen left a voicemail that was different from all her previous ones. She wasn't confused or worried anymore. She was angry. She said, I had no right to do this. That grandfather left that old will intentionally. That the new will was something he wrote when he was sick and not thinking clearly. That I was manipulating a dying man's confused last wishes to steal from my family. That's her strategy, apparently. Claim grandfather wasn't competent when he signed the real will. Patricia expected this too. That's why we spent so much time verifying everything. The will was written and signed 2 weeks before he died. But grandfather had been lucid and functional until his last 3 days. His doctor documented his mental state. The lawyer who witnessed it documented his competency. Ellen's going to have a hard time proving otherwise. But here's what I didn't expect. Archibald left a voicemail that was just him breathing for 30 seconds before hanging up. Then he called back and said we needed to meet, just the 2 of us, father and son. He said there were things about grandfather and Ellen's marriage I didn't know. Things that might explain why Ellen did what she did. He said if I wanted the truth about everything, I should meet him tomorrow at the hardware store on Franklin Street at 2 p.m. I have no idea what he's talking about, but I'm going to find out because if there's more to this story, I need to know before court proceedings start. Patricia said I should record everything. I told her I've been recording since this began. The petition gets filed in 5 days. After that, it's all public record. Everyone will know, and that's when things are really going to explode. Update 2. Thanks to everyone following this mess. Someone in the comments asked if I was worried about my safety. And honestly, no. These people aren't violent. They're just used to getting their way and can't handle that. I'm not playing along anymore, but I'm keeping records of everything because Patricia said that matters. So, I met Archibald at the hardware store yesterday. For those asking why I agreed to meet him alone, it's because I've been planning this confrontation for years, and I'm not afraid of him. Also, I recorded the entire conversation on my phone, which was in my jacket pocket the whole time. He was already there when I arrived, standing by the lumber section, pretending to look at 2x4s. I walked up and he turned around and looked at me like he was trying to figure out what to say. Finally, he just said we should talk outside, that the store was too crowded. We went to the parking lot and sat in his truck, which smelled like sawdust and coffee like it always has. Archibald started by saying he knew I was angry, and he understood why, but there were things about the situation I didn't understand. He said Ellen wasn't a bad person. She was just protecting what she thought was hers. I asked him what that meant, And he got quiet for a minute before he explained that my grandfather had always favored me over everyone else, including Ellen's own children, including him. And Ellen had spent 40 years dealing with that. Apparently, grandfather made it clear throughout his marriage to Ellen that he thought Archibald was weak, that he thought Julian was arrogant, that Brent was lazy, that none of them measured up. But me, I reminded him of himself when he was young. Ellen had to sit there for decades watching her husband pour attention and time into his grandson while barely acknowledging her kids' accomplishments. When grandfather got sick and changed his will to leave me almost everything, Ellen saw it as a final insult. So when he died, she took the old will and buried the new one because in her mind she was correcting an injustice. I told Archibald that didn't make it legal. He said he knew that, but he was asking me to understand the context. He said the reason they all treated me so badly after I had financial trouble was because Ellen convinced them I was just like grandfather. That I thought I was better than everyone else. That my failures proved grandfather was wrong about me. She turned my struggles into a family narrative about me getting what I deserved. Then Archibald said something that made me realize how deep this went. He told me that the $100K he and Morin received from the estate, they gave $30K of it to Julian for his condo down payment and another $20K to Brent for rental property repairs. They kept $50K for themselves. None of it went to helping me, even though according to the real will, that was the entire purpose. When I was getting evicted and desperate, they had $50,000 that was supposed to be for me, and they never said a word. I asked him why he was telling me this now. He said because Julian was panicking and talking about doing something stupid. That Julian had contacted a real estate agent about selling the lake property fast before the court case could freeze the assets. That if Julian sold it and the money was gone by the time the probate court ruled in my favor, I'd have to chase him for the value and it would take years. Archibald wanted me to know so I could stop it. But he also wanted something in return. He asked if there was any way to settle this without destroying everyone. He said Brent has been living off the rental income, that he'd lose his primary source of money, that Julian built his whole financial plan around owning that property, that Lydia used the car money for her daughter's education, that Morin would be devastated to learn she'd been sitting on money meant for me while I suffered. I told him I'd been devastated for 6 years while they all laughed at me. He got angry then and said I was being vindictive, that revenge wasn't the same as justice. I said watching them lose everything they stole from me was exactly justice. He hit the steering wheel and told me I was being just like grandfather, stubborn and cruel and willing to burn everything down to prove a point. That's when I got out of the truck. But before I left, I told him to tell Julian that if he tries to sell that property, I'll have Patricia file an emergency injunction within 24 hours. Archibald called after me, saying I was making a huge mistake, but I was already walking away. Got home and immediately called Patricia. Told her everything Archibald said about Julian trying to sell. She made some calls and found out Julian had indeed contacted 2 real estate agents in the past week asking about quick sales, cash buyers, how fast he could close. Patricia filed paperwork that same afternoon with the probate court requesting a preliminary injunction preventing any asset transfers or sales related to the estate pending our petition. The judge granted it this morning, which means as of right now, Julian cannot sell that lake house. Brent cannot sell or transfer any of the rental properties. Lydia cannot sell the remaining cars. Everything is frozen and they all just got notification letters about it. My phone has been ringing nonstop since noon. Julian called me 17 times in 2 hours. Finally left a voicemail screaming that I was destroying his life, that he'd made commitments based on owning that property, that I was doing this out of spite, that he had a buyer ready to pay asking price, and now he couldn't close. He actually said I was stealing from him. The irony was amazing. Brent left 3 voicemails, each one angrier than the last. He said he'd put over $80K of his own money into those rental properties over 6 years, that he'd renovated units and fixed foundations and replaced roofs. He said even if the properties are legally mine, he's owed compensation for improvements. He demanded I call him so we could work out a deal before this went further. Lydia's message was different. She was crying and saying she didn't know any of this was happening, that she was just told the cars were hers, that she'd already spent the money from the one she sold. She asked how she was supposed to pay me back for a car she didn't steal, that Ellen gave it to her. She kept saying this wasn't fair. But here's the interesting part. Ellen didn't call me at all today, not once. Instead, she called a family meeting at her house tonight. And I know this because Morin texted me about it. The text said Ellen wanted everyone there to discuss the situation and make a plan. That this had gone too far, that we needed to handle this as a family before it became a public court case. I didn't respond to Morin either, but I did drive past Ellen's house around 7 p.m. when the meeting was supposed to start. Saw Julian's car, Brent's truck, Lydia's SUV, my parents' cars. They were all there having a meeting about me without me planning their strategy. Patricia said this would happen too. She said once assets get frozen, people start turning on each other because they realize their interests aren't the same. Brent wants compensation for his improvements. Julian wants to keep the property he thought was his. Lydia needs money to replace what she spent. Morin and Archibald want to keep their $50,000, and Ellen wants to maintain control of the house she's been living in. The problem is they can't all get what they want. The estate has to be redistributed according to the real will, which means someone is going to lose, and they're all trying to make sure it isn't them. Patricia said, families destroy themselves in situations like this because everyone thinks they have the best claim and everyone thinks everyone else should sacrifice instead. I got a text from Morin 3 hours after the meeting started. She said they'd discussed everything and wanted to propose a settlement. They'd acknowledged the real will was legitimate, but they wanted me to agree to let them keep what they already had in exchange for them paying me a lump sum. She said they could pool resources and offer me $400,000 to walk away from the rest. $400,000 to let them keep $1.7 million in property and assets that are legally mine. They think I'm that stupid or that desperate. Or maybe they're just that desperate and hoping I'll take it. I texted back and said no. Morin called immediately and I actually answered this time. She said I was being unreasonable, that $400,000 was more money than I'd ever had in my life, that I could use it to build something for myself instead of tearing down what everyone else had built. I told her they built their lives on stolen inheritance and they didn't get to keep it just because time had passed. She started crying and said I was her son, that she loved me, that watching me do this was killing her. She said she made mistakes, but she never meant to hurt me, that Ellen had convinced her the old will was real, that she didn't know about the money being meant for me. I asked her if she thought $50,000 would have helped me when I was getting evicted. She got quiet. Then she said yes, it would have. And she was sorry. But sorry doesn't give me back 6 years. Sorry doesn't undo the humiliation. Sorry doesn't fix the fact that they all sat on assets and money that belonged to me while treating me like I was worthless. I told her that and hung up. The petition officially gets filed tomorrow morning. After that, it's public record and there's no taking it back. Patricia has everything ready. We're asking the court to void the previous probate order and redistribute the estate according to the real will. We're also asking for an accounting of all income generated from estate assets over the past 6 years, which means Brent is going to have to document every dollar of rent he collected and every expense he claimed. Julian sent me a text an hour ago that just said he'd never forgive me for this. I don't need his forgiveness. I need what's mine. Ellen still hasn't called me directly. But Archibald sent a text saying she wanted me to know she'd fight this with everything she had. That she'd prove grandfather wasn't competent when he signed the new will. That I'd regret dragging this family through court. He said I still had time to settle before it became a war. But it's already a war. It's been a war since the moment Ellen hid that will 6 years ago. I'm just finally fighting back. Tomorrow everything changes. Tomorrow they stop being able to pretend this isn't real. Tomorrow the court documents get filed and everyone will know exactly what Ellen did and exactly what I'm taking back. I've been ready for this for years. They're about to find out how. Ready. Final update. This is going to be long, but I want to document everything while it's still fresh. For everyone who followed this from the beginning, thank you. For everyone who said I should just take a settlement and walk away, you were wrong, and I'm glad I didn't listen. The petition got filed 3 weeks ago. That's when things accelerated in ways I didn't fully expect, even though Patricia warned me. The court assigned an emergency hearing within 10 days because of the asset freeze and because we were challenging a 6-year-old probate order. Ellen hired a lawyer immediately, some guy named Richard, who specializes in estate litigation. His strategy was exactly what we predicted. Argue that grandfather wasn't competent when he signed the real will. The hearing was at the county courthouse on a Thursday morning. I wore a suit I'd bought specifically for this. Patricia had prepped me for days on what to expect and what not to say. The hearing room was smaller than I thought it would be. Ellen was there with Richard. Brent was there. Julian was there. Archibald and Morin were there. Lydia wasn't. She'd sent a letter to the court saying she was neutral and would comply with whatever was decided. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judge Morrison. She reviewed all our filed documents before the hearing even started. Patricia presented the real will, the documentation proving it was properly executed, the testimony from grandfather's doctor about his mental state, the statement from the lawyer who witnessed the signing. Everything was airtight. Richard tried to argue that grandfather had been on pain medication that could have affected his judgment. Patricia presented medical records showing the medication was at therapeutic levels and grandfather's doctor had cleared him as competent to make legal decisions right up until his final days. Richard tried to argue that the real will was so different from the previous one that it showed impaired thinking. Patricia pointed out that people change their minds about inheritance all the time and that's not evidence of incompetence. Then Richard made a mistake. He argued that the real will was unfairly weighted toward me and against Ellen and her children, suggesting that proved grandfather wasn't thinking clearly. Patricia asked if Richard was suggesting that loving your grandson more than your wife's adult children was a sign of mental incompetence. The judge shut that line of argument down immediately. But here's where it got interesting. Judge Morrison asked Ellen directly why she had presented the old will instead of the new one. Richard tried to answer for her, but the judge said no. She wanted to hear from Ellen herself. Ellen claimed she didn't know about the new will, that she'd only found the old one in grandfather's files. Patricia presented evidence that the new will had been filed with grandfather's lawyer, and that Ellen had been copied on that filing via mail. Ellen's face changed when Patricia showed the court the certified mail receipt with Ellen's signature from 7 years ago. She'd signed for the documents. She knew about the new will. She lied to everyone for 6 years. The judge asked Ellen to explain the signature and Ellen said she got a lot of mail. She didn't remember that specific document. Maybe she signed for it but never opened it. Patricia then presented the fact that Ellen had actively presented the old will to the family and to the probate court as if it was current despite having received notice of a newer will. Judge Morrison asked Richard if his client understood that presenting false documents to probate court could have serious legal consequences. That's when Richard asked for a recess to consult with his client. They huddled in the hallway for 20 minutes. When they came back, Richard said Ellen wanted to propose a settlement. Judge Morrison said that was between the parties, but she was ready to make a preliminary ruling on the will's validity based on the evidence presented. She ruled that the real will was properly executed, that grandfather was competent, and that it should have been the will probated 6 years ago. Then she ordered mediation before she'd issue final orders on asset redistribution. She wanted both parties to attempt settlement before she forced a resolution. She scheduled mediation for the following week and extended the asset freeze until it was resolved. We went to mediation at a conference room in a law office downtown. Neutral mediator, older guy named Frank, who'd done estate mediation for 30 years. Ellen was there with Richard. Julian came. Brent came. Archibald and Morin came. Patricia and I sat on one side of the table, all of them on the other. Frank started by explaining that mediation was voluntary, but the judge had made it clear she expected good faith negotiations. Then he asked what I wanted. I told him I wanted exactly what the will stated. Every property, every asset, every dollar that should have been mine for the past 6 years. Frank asked if I was open to any compromise. I said no. That's when it got heated. Julian said I was being unreasonable and vindictive. Brent said I couldn't just take back properties he'd been maintaining and improving for years without compensating him. Ellen said the house had been her home for 40 years and she wasn't leaving. Morin said I was destroying the family over money. I let them talk. Patricia had coached me on this. Let them show the mediator who they really are. Let them reveal that they're not interested in what's right, only in what they want to keep. After they'd all had their say, Frank asked me to respond. I said I'd spent 6 years being humiliated by these people while they lived off inheritance they stole from me. I said they had treated me like garbage while sitting on my money and my property. I said Ellen had committed what amounted to fraud and everyone at this table had benefited from it. I said I didn't care about their feelings or their problems because they never cared about mine. Frank asked if there was any settlement I'd accept. I told him yes. Here's what I wanted, and it was non-negotiable. Ellen would vacate the main house within 60 days. The house transfers to me immediately. Julian would deed the lake property to me within 30 days. 3 of the 4 rental properties would transfer to me. Brent keeps 1 as the will specified. All rental income collected on my 3 properties over the past 6 years gets paid to me minus documented expenses. That came out to about $180K after Patricia and Brent's lawyer did the math. Lydia would owe me the current market value of the car she sold, roughly $35K. My parents would return $50K of the money they received since they used it for Julian and Brent instead of me as intended. And Ellen would publicly acknowledge to the entire family that she hid the real will deliberately. The room went silent. Then Julian said there was no way he was giving me that property, that he'd fight this to the end. Brent said I couldn't demand 6 years of rental income when he'd been managing everything and making improvements. Ellen said she wouldn't leave her home. Morin said they didn't have $50K to give me. Frank asked what they were proposing instead. Richard said they'd agree to redistribute assets going forward, but nothing retroactive. They'd acknowledge the real will and restructure accordingly, but I couldn't demand back payment of rental income or force Ellen out of the house immediately. They proposed Ellen could stay until her death and then the house would be mine. I laughed, actually laughed out loud, told Frank that wasn't a settlement. That was them trying to delay consequences until they were all dead. Patricia backed me up and said we weren't negotiating away my client's legal rights because they found accountability inconvenient. Frank tried for 3 hours to find middle ground. Eventually, Richard pulled Ellen aside and they had a long conversation in the hallway. When they came back, Richard said they'd agreed to my terms on everything except the house. Ellen wanted 2 years to find new housing, not 60 days. And she wanted the rental income amount reduced to account for Brent's labor in managing the properties. I told Frank I'd give Ellen 90 days on the house, not 2 years. 90 days was reasonable time to find somewhere to live. As for the rental income, I'd accept a reduction to $140K instead of $180 ETI to account for Brent's management. But that was as far as I'd go. More huddles, more consultations. Finally, Richard said they'd agree to those terms if I'd agree not to pursue any additional claims. I asked what additional claims. Patricia jumped in and reminded them that I could argue they'd been unjustly enriched by living off estate assets. That I could demand they pay fair market rent for the use of properties I should have owned. That would add another $200K to what they owed me easily. That's what broke them. The realization that I could make this even worse. Richard conferred with everyone and came back saying they'd accept the settlement. All of it. Ellen would move out in 90 days. Julian would deed the lake property within 30 days. Brent would transfer 3 rental properties and pay me $140K. Lydia would pay $35K for the car value. My parents would return $50K. Everything in writing, all legally binding. Frank drafted the settlement agreement right there. Everyone signed it, including me. The agreement was filed with the court that afternoon, and Judge Morrison signed off on it the next day. It became a court order, legally enforceable. That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, everything has fallen apart for them in exactly the way I wanted. Julian deeded the lake property to me last week. Turns out he'd been planning to use it as collateral for a business loan and now he can't. He'd also been telling his fiancée they'd get married there next year. I got a text from him saying I'd ruined his engagement plans and destroyed his financial future. I didn't respond. Brent transferred the 3 rental properties 5 days ago. The tenants all got notices that ownership had changed and rent payments now go to my account. Brent also wrote me a check for $140K. He called me afterward and said he hoped I understood that I just bankrupted him, that he'd been living off that rental income and now had nothing. He said he hoped it was worth it. I told him it was absolutely worth it. Lydia sent me payments of $35K in installments, the final one clearing yesterday. She included a note saying her daughter would have to take out student loans now because of this, that I was punishing an innocent girl for something that wasn't Lydia's fault. I didn't respond to that either. My parents transferred $50,000 3 days ago. Archibald called me afterward and we had the longest conversation we've had since this started. He said I'd gotten what I wanted and destroyed what was left of the family in the process. He said Maureen was devastated and couldn't understand how her son could be so cold. He said they both spent the past weeks trying to figure out where they went wrong raising me. I told him they went wrong when they took money meant for me and gave it to Julian. They went wrong when they sat back and watched everyone humiliate me for years. They went wrong when they chose Ellen's version of events over asking me what actually happened. Archibald said I was right about all of that, but 2 wrongs didn't make a right. I told him I wasn't making a wrong right. I was taking back what was mine. Then I hung up. But Ellen's situation is the best part. She has 73 days left before she has to vacate the house, my house. She's been calling me nonstop trying to negotiate for more time. In the past 2 weeks alone, she's called me 94 times. 94, I counted. I haven't answered once. She's left voicemails begging for an extension, saying she can't find anywhere to move on such short notice, saying this is cruel, saying I'm punishing an old woman for trying to protect her family. Her last voicemail was yesterday. She said she'd been wrong about me, that she'd underestimated me, that grandfather would be proud of how ruthless I'd become. She said she'd spent 6 years thinking I was weak and pathetic when really I was just patient. She said she realized too late that I was more like grandfather than she'd ever admitted. That we were both willing to destroy anything that got in our way. She's not wrong. Grandfather taught me that family politics is just politics, and you don't win by being nice. You win by being smarter and more prepared than everyone else. Ellen thought hiding that would solve her problems permanently. She thought I'd stay beaten down forever. She was wrong and now she's paying for it. The family is completely fractured now. Julian won't speak to Brent because Brent settled instead of fighting. Brent won't speak to Ellen because Ellen's fraud is what caused all this. Maureen won't speak to Julian because Julian's attempt to sell the lake house is what triggered the emergency injunction that froze everything. Archibald won't speak to me at all. Lydia is caught in the middle trying to stay neutral. Nobody's speaking to Ellen except to blame her. I own the main house now. I own the lake property. I own 3 rental properties generating about $6,000 monthly income. I have $140,000 in cash from Brent, $35,000 from Lydia, $50,000 from my parents. My net worth went from basically nothing to over $1.5 million in 3 weeks. Everything grandfather wanted me to have, I have now. Ellen has to move into a rental apartment because she can't afford to buy anything on her retirement income. Julian lost his collateral and his wedding venue. Brent lost 75% of his income stream. Lydia had to drain her savings. My parents lost money they'd been counting on for retirement. And they all have to live with knowing this happened because Ellen decided to hide a will 6 years ago. I'm not sorry. I'm not conflicted. I'm not questioning whether I did the right thing. I spent 6 years being the family punching bag while they lived off my inheritance. Now they know exactly how it feels to lose everything while someone else watches and does nothing. Except I'm not watching and doing nothing. I'm watching and enjoying it. Ellen moves out in 73 days. I've already had contractors give me estimates for renovations. I'm planning to update the kitchen, redo the floors, turn grandfather's old workshop into a home office. I'm going to live in that house and every day Ellen will know I'm there living the life she tried to steal from me. Some family members will probably never forgive me. I don't need their forgiveness. Some of them think I'm cruel and vindictive. I don't care what they think. They made me the villain in their story for 6 years. Now I'm the villain who won. And that's exactly what I planned for. That's exactly what grandfather taught me. Don't get mad. Get even. And when you get even, make sure they remember it forever. They'll remember this. Every time Julian drives past that lake property, every time Brent collects rent on his one remaining property, every time Ellen pays rent on her apartment, every time my parents look at their retirement account, they'll remember the family loser who turned out to be smarter than all of them combined. The prodigal loser returned and he took.